wants to achieve to their potential in their life. And I believe that people think that the biggest danger to them reaching their potential is something they don't know. When there's something you don't know, you keep looking for it. So the biggest danger to achieving our potential is not something we don't know. The biggest danger to achieving our potential is something you know for sure. Because at that point, you quit looking. What you know is what you know. You're not going to listen to anything else. And so that, curiously, is the opposite of wisdom.
That was Andy Andrews. Andy has been hailed by a New York Times reporter as someone who has quietly become one of the most influential people in America. He's a best-selling novelist whose books have been translated into 40 languages. As an inspirational speaker, he's been asked to speak by 4 U.S. presidents, and he served as a consultant to some of the world's largest corporations and sports teams.
We're glad you joined us to hear these inspiring stories from older adults, people who have so much experience and words of wisdom to share, but are sometimes overlooked in society today. I'm Sally Hussey, the CEO of 50 Forward, a Nashville-based nonprofit. Our mission is to support, champion, and enhance the lives of those 50 and older.
And I'm Susan Sizemore, your guide through these beautiful conversations with those who are living life to the fullest and who know how to squeeze the day in their second chapter of life. Now, in my second chapter and encore career, I'm following my passion for sharing the stories of older adults with you and with the world. If you like what you hear, please rate and follow Squeeze the Day on your favorite podcast platform. Today's Squeeze the Day is brought to you by the All of Us Research Program from the National Institutes of Health. Learn how you can help change the future of health by participating in the program. Visit www.joinallofus.org to learn more. In this Squeeze the Day, let's learn how Andy's sense of self, research, comedy, and thirst for knowledge took him from under a bridge in Alabama to the top of the world. Welcome, Andy.
Susan, how are you doing?
I'm just doing great. It's a beautiful fall day here in Middle Tennessee in Nashville. And what's happening down there in the Gulf Shores area?
It's still hot. It's like 150 degrees here today. Somebody just walked in front of the studio and melted right into the concrete right there.
So let's just get into this. We've known each other for a long time, but we really haven't stayed in touch. And when we launched this podcast, I thought, man, I just wonder what Andy Andrews is up to. And I'm a bit blown away by all the things you've accomplished. And I want to start by turning back time to when we first met. You were an aspiring comedian, featured often on the Nashville Network, and I was a publicist. Those were good times for certain. Do you ever long for those good old days?
Yeah, I don't think I would go back to them, but I look back on them with happy memories and great friends and good people and everybody struggling to do their best. It was a great time, and now, of course, we look back, you and I were both surrounded by country music. And so it's amazing now. My boys are 23 and 21, and they like country music. And of course, I don't know any of the new people, but I knew all of the old ones. You and I knew all of them. And I told somebody the other day, the only 2 guys that I never met is I never met George Strait and never met Don Williams. But other than that, know them all.
Geez, what an incredible foundation. And I'm with you. The music industry has changed a lot, and it's hard to keep up with people and the new names and the new acts, probably because we aren't in the business. But those were really formative years. And I want to kind of fast forward now to something a reporter of the New York Times said about you not that long ago. Described you as someone who has quietly become one of the most influential people in America. And Zig Ziglar said Andy Andrews is the best speaker I've ever seen. Is that a meteoric rise in your opinion? And how have those comments fueled your career?
Well, the New York Times guy saying that I had quietly become one of the most influential people in America, I think quietly would be the key there. You know, I'm not sure that's true. I appreciated it when he said it, and I know why. I don't really have a specific, group that I speak to or that I work with or that I write for. It's kind of across the board. And so I've done 8 years around the world with special operations. I've worked with the War College, Naval War College. I've worked with presidents of the United States and a lot of companies, a lot of major corporations and sports teams. And so it's been kind of that broad-based thing where you kind of touch people a little bit and they remember it, or you're able to help and create results for them. And of course, Zig Ziglar, if anybody else had said I was a great speaker, it'd be like, yeah, okay. But when Zig Ziglar said it, because he's truly the greatest of all time, and so I'm still kind of blown away at that.
Yeah, what a compliment. And I have to ask too, how did you transition from comedy to inspirational speaking? And what exactly is the difference in your mind between inspirational and motivational speaking?
If you look at our website, andyandrews.com or wisdomharbor.com or creatingmeasurableresults.com, any of our websites, you will never find the word motivational. I think there's a statute of limitations on motivation. You can motivate somebody and it'll last until the first crazy thing that happens in their life. Or you can motivate somebody and it'll last until Monday, as long as you motivate them late on a Friday. My point is that there's an end to it. And yet, inspiration is really kind of the beginning part of that. It nudges. But what I'm really into is proof. Not encouragement, not motivation, or really inspiration. I'm into proof, because proof lasts. And proof doesn't require on an emotional response. It doesn't require my tone of voice to be any certain thing. It doesn't require you to be sitting with a group of people at a certain place. Proof, you could hear somebody say something and I'm not talking about a mathematical proof. I'm talking about a proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That kind of proof where you hear something you hadn't heard and your response is, I never thought of that. I don't guess I'll ever think of it any other way again. That proof lasts because it doesn't have any emotion to it. And again, you could have read something that listed that response. You could have heard something on TV. Somebody could have said something to you. But when that happens, that proof lasts. And I have found that something that lasts is better suited to creating the life you choose than something that doesn't last. For proof to last, it has to be aligned with truth, because at any point you begin to doubt that what you believe is the truth, it's no longer proof. And so I really consider myself more of a teacher than anything else. I have a company called creatingmeasurableresults.com, and I work with corporations and teams and organizations, and we're able to a lot of times double their results in a year. And so we've had some amazing successes there, and we're able to do it at a cost that's low enough for even big companies to participate. And so it's made a big difference, but it's all based on proving something.
No, very interesting viewpoint. And how about the transition from comedy to speaking?
That transition happened when I wrote The Traveler's Gift. The Traveler's Gift, it was Good Morning America's Book of the Month. And then it ended up a couple of years later, Good Morning America called that book one of the 5 books you should read in your lifetime. And literally, when that book came out, I was never booked as a comedian again. I just, for whatever reason, I was more valuable as a speaker than I was as a comedian. And so, companies and organizations started bringing me in to talk about those 7 decisions in The Traveler's Gift. And that really, expanded what I thought I could do and who I could help. And so it's odd to me now because I look back at the comedian years. I mean, as you know, I toured for 2 years with Joan Rivers, for 5 years with Kenny Rogers. I toured with Shaka Khan and Cher and Dolly Parton and a lot of other people. But
Just a few names that people will recognize, right?
yeah, but I look back at that time and I think it's almost like a different life, and yet the skills that I used to create material are the same skills I use today, creating insight for people to live better and more productive lives. It's just noticing things that other people miss.
Yeah, and I do think that that's a gift that I remember seeing that in you years ago, and I think a comedian and different writers and such too have that gift of a unique lens on life presents really wonderful opportunities, and it's a gift, but it also I think is something that you've done a really fabulous job of turning into not only a livelihood maybe, but also a gift to others, which is super cool.
Well, thanks. I have prayed every day for years, God, help me to understand things you want your people to understand. That if they did understand, they'd live the lives you want them to live. And give me simple ways to explain complicated things that are confusing people. And I feel like that prayer is constantly being answered.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And boiling down complexities is so important, and I see it time and time again. We know that 4 U.S. presidents have asked you to speak at events. Can you tell us who those presidents were?
People ask me, which 4 presidents did you speak for? And I learned my lesson because I didn't really realize that I had friends that were on both sides of the aisle until I started doing a lot of television. And I would hear, there would be certain friends that would say, hey, I saw you on Fox News yesterday. And then there would be a whole different group of friends that would say, hey, I saw you on CNN yesterday. And, you go to New York, you're doing CNN, Fox, MSNBC. But I started finding out which side of the aisle my friends were on by what they would tell me they saw me on. And so a lot of times I would say, these are the presidents that I spoke for. And people would say, well, why didn't you speak for so-and-so? Why didn't you speak for so? And it's like, because he didn't ask. I mean, if the president asks, I'm going to do it. But I can't make them ask.
Yeah, makes sense.
But if you're curious, it was Ford, Reagan, Bush, and Bush.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Tell us a little bit about speaking with the Department of Defense, or are you sworn to secrecy?
No, I've done a lot of that. I've done it all over the world, and I've done it in different areas. I worked with Special Operations Command for 8 years, and was in a lot of stuff there. Some of which I can't talk about, I suppose. But I worked with squadron commanders, and I worked with families whose existence was on foreign bases, and yet the dad was in and out of deployment. The tactics teams are almost entirely male, or they were when I was working with them. And so these are on bases around the world, whereas when a guard unit is deployed or a regular infantry unit is deployed, everybody kind of knows where they are or where they're going and when they're coming back. But there is a lot of tension that is included when you have your whole family with you, and 2:00 in the morning is a phone call, be on the flight line at 2:30, and you can't tell anybody where you're going. You can't tell everybody when you're coming back. So there's just a lot to that. And then there were suicides happening in the Air Force that I worked with. That the book, The Butterfly Effect, actually came out of that. Then there's been, I've worked with the Naval War College, and I just did a course on critical thinking. So they had all the honchos of all the branches of the military and commanders from 16 of our allies there. I'm looking at the at organizations, looking at teams, looking at functionaries, and figuring out what is the aspect of results that they're missing. And with creatingmeasurableresults.com, we're very, very adept at figuring that out quickly.
So as you're talking, I hear the teacher in you, and I'm wondering about how that teaching fits into your personal life. And I remember meeting your wife, Polly, and now you've got, I think, 2 children as well. Are any of them following in your footsteps?
Not the specific footsteps. Now, Adam, our 21-year-old, he is a fisherman. I mean, that's what he does for a living. And he is incredible, and he's funny. He's a great guy. And so I grew up fishing, and I thought I was pretty good at it until I got around Adam. And he has like taken what I used to think I was pretty good at it and just made me feel like a beginner, you know? He is incredible at what he does, and he takes people all the time. And then Austin, our older one, he's into the outdoors too, and he builds knives. AustinLegacyKnives.com. He does these one-of-a-kind knives, but he is the one who got some kind of performing gene because Austin plays guitar and sings and writes music, and he performs around. And his website is austingraymusic.com, Gray, austingraymusic.com. And you can see, I mean, people ask, where did that talent come from? And I can carry a tune, but the sound doesn't sound the same coming out of my mouth. He is pretty incredible.
Very cool, very cool. Let's talk a little bit about your life. I know life hasn't always been so easy for you. At one point, while you were fighting for success, you really fought for a roof over your head when you were very young during your teenage years, and that must have been just an awfully difficult time.
Yeah, it was pretty strange. My parents died when I was 19. My mom died of cancer. My dad was killed in a car accident the same year. So it was pretty crazy. I've always had the ability to take a bad situation and make it worse, though. So I did. I made some moves, and it didn't work out. And I ended up literally homeless. I was living under a pier on the Gulf Coast, in and out of people's garages, which is not safe or smart, but I did. And I met an old guy there under my pier one night, scared me to death. That his name was Jones. We didn't call him Mr. Jones. We just called him Jones. And we had seen him in and out of town, and we knew who he was, kind of, but we never knew where he stayed when he was in town, never knew where he went when he left. You know, we look at him and go, is he 80 or 180? We weren't really sure. Never knew what he had in that suitcase he carried around with him, but he was the first person in my life to ever tell me the truth about myself. And when I say tell me the truth about myself, sometimes I'll say that and I'll see people kind of wrinkle their brow. And it's like when you meet somebody having a tough time, what do we do? We give them $5, we buy them a meal, we put them on the prayer list, but rarely do we sit down and tell them things about themselves that might make them angry at us. And that's what Jones did. And people say, so he made you mad? Yeah, kind of, constantly. You know, but where am I going? I'm living under a pier. And he's the only person paying any attention to me. He got me started reading biographies. And I eventually read over 200 biographies of these happy, influential, financially secure, great people. I would read these books thinking, what is it about these people? How did they turn out this way? Is it something they did, or were they born this way? Because I thought, if they're born this way, I'm out of luck. But if it's something they did, what did they do? And how long did it take them to do it? And I identified 7 things in the lives of these people. That's what I called them. I called them things. I knew they weren't really 7 habits. They weren't 7 ideas, not 7 theories. I finally figured out they were 7 principles is what they were. And watching and reading about these people, I would see it was like every life you could, with the passage of time, we could see all 7 of those things in their life. I just wasn't sure that I found anybody that knew they had all 7. They just knew they had 2 or 3 and they would harness those. And, with the passage of time, we could look at their entire life and see where those others fit in. But I remember thinking, what happens to somebody who knows all 7? What happens to a kid whose parents know all 7 of these principles and understand them well enough to explain them to the child? What happens to that life? And so long story short, those are the 7 principles that I started throwing in my life at that point to yank myself out of the situations there with the peer. And I've been applying those ever since.
First of all, thank you for sharing that story. I know it's got to be tough reliving it. And I also, in your teaching, hear you speak about having a mentor, a role model, and intergenerational sharing, which maybe Jones played a role in all of that. But thank God for Jones coming into your life, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we called him the old man or Jones, and I ended up writing a book about him called The Noticer, because that's what he calls himself. He would say, when God was passing out talents, I didn't get the cool ones. I can't run fast. I can't sing great, but I notice little things that make a difference in people's life. I'm a noticer. And so I ended up writing a book called The Noticer about him.
If this story is motivating you to look closer at someone's life and to learn more about how tough times can create larger opportunities, reach out to a neighbor or friend to learn more about them. Squeeze the day by getting involved in your community to deliver food or engage and learn from the wisdom and experience of an older adult. If you'd like to learn more, visit 54.org. That's FIFTY, Let's make a difference together. And now back to our show. At one point you said, is life just a lottery ticket, or are there choices one can make to direct his future? What are your thoughts on that now?
I believe there are definitely choices that somebody can make to direct their future. I think that the choices we make are determined by our thinking, because if it was just choices, that's kind of like flipping a coin. You tell your kids, make good choices, make good choices, make good choices. And then when they don't, we go, was that a good choice? That wasn't a good choice. We're going to make good choices from now on. Unless we as adults can understand how good choices are made and where choices come from so that we can determine whether we're making good ones or bad ones. Until we understand that, just telling a kid to make good choices is not going to make that much of a difference. And so to understand that our choices are determined by our thinking, that the thinking is the foundation of your destiny. You've heard people say your choices determine where you end up in life. Well, that's true, because our choices, what do they choose? A choice chooses an action. An action yields a result. And those results over time become who we are. That becomes our culture. That becomes our reputation. And so our choices in that format do create our destiny, but it's not enough, because the foundation of choices is your thinking. And if you ever doubt that, you got to remember that every choice you've ever made in your life, every choice you will ever make, is totally determined by how you think, what you think about, how long you think about it, what you decide you can't be thinking about, so it doesn't distract you from thinking about what you got to think about, so you can decide. It's our thinking. And the beauty of that is that while our thinking determines our choices, we can choose how we think. Consider the things that prompt your thinking in a direction. It's usually something you read, something you see, something you hear, somebody you're around. And so we can choose how we think because we can choose what we read. We can choose what we listen to. We can choose what we watch, and we can choose who we hang around. And probably even more important to choosing how we think is that you can choose what you will not watch. You can choose what you will not read and what you will not listen to and who you will not be around. And in those ways, we can choose the direction of our thinking. And when we're choosing our thinking and our thinking is yielding those choices, then we're actually in control. It's not a lottery ticket.
The mind is so powerful. Let's just play a speed round of questions with just some quick responses. What would you tell your younger self?
Calm down. Be patient.
Who is the one person you'd love to meet?
George Washington Carver.
What's the best book you've ever read?
The Old Man and the Boy by Robert Rourke.
And do you have a collection of hotel keys?
I do. I still have those. I quit keeping them when they turned into cards. But years ago, when I was doing colleges, you obviously remember that big jar that I had I would take the keys. And these were real keys. And so I saw those the other day. And as many times as we've moved or cleaned or whatever, I haven't managed to make myself throw those away.
Another question I have is, I know you have a very, very full plate, and I'm wondering if there's anything else you want to share that's on the horizon. Our mutual friend, Edgar Struble, mentioned that maybe you've got a movie underway?
Yeah, well, it's not maybe. They're doing it. I wrote a book called The Heart Mender, and The Heart Mender is my favorite book I've ever written. And so a noble story, Edgar's one of the producers. And so they've already hired the casting director, hired the director, the set designer, the cinematographer, and casting is next. And so it's very curious to see that take shape.
Boy, can't wait to learn more. One of our key values is ensuring that every interaction, regardless of complexity, is met with kindness and empathy, giving hope to those who may be alone in this world. How might that ring true in your life?
I think how we treat each other will determine the future of our nation. That may not be a really encouraging statement to make right now, but I really believe that how we treat each other is critical to how we get along, how we are able to produce, how we're able to help. And there's a difference in kindness and tolerance. You can be tolerant and patently unkind. There is a difference. I get sometimes that people who are screaming tolerance are really wanting kindness. And I understand that, but tolerance is a double-edged sword. You can't ask for tolerance and be intolerant. So kindness is our answer.
I think the world might be a very different place if we put kindness at the forefront of everything we did. I've got a couple questions we ask all of our guests. One is, what's one piece of advice your parents or maybe an older adult shared with you that at the time you thought was silly, but now that phrase rings true in your everyday life?
That goes right along with what's the best piece of advice I've ever gotten, because it was Jones who told me this one day. He said, you got to remember, you can't always believe everything you think. And it went over my head, but it was so odd that I kept coming back to it. And here's what I believe that means now, or this is the best way I can explain it. Have you ever known something? I mean, you knew it, and you could argue it, and you could win the argument every time. And then you found 6 months later, a year later, ooh, that was not exactly correct. Or, gosh, my information was a little incomplete there. Okay. All right. Well, if you've ever done that in your life, does the possibility exist that something you know now, your information might be incomplete? And you would say, well, Andy, of course, something I know now, my information might be incomplete. Okay, I agree. But the point is, we don't know what that is, do we? Or how many subjects in your life that may cover. And so there is a misunderstanding that I think people have about achieving to their potential. Everybody wants to achieve to their potential. They want their children to achieve their potential. They want to reach the potential in their life. And I believe that people think that the biggest danger to them reaching their potential is something they don't know. That would seem right just on the surface. There's something I'm missing. There's something I don't know. And yet, something you don't know is not going to get in the way of the process, because when you don't know something, you keep asking, you keep searching, you keep listening, you keep talking. When there's something you don't know, you keep looking for it. So the biggest danger to achieving our potential is not something we don't know. The biggest danger to achieving our potential is something you know for sure. Because at that point, you quit looking. It's over. What you know is what you know, and you're not going to listen to anything else. And so that, curiously, is the opposite of wisdom. And I'm actually just making this connection as I sit here and talk to you, that is the opposite of wisdom, because a definition of wisdom is a deeper understanding of principle. Now, the definition of wisdom is not a deep understanding of principle. If it was a deep understanding of principle, that's a target. And you could hit that. You could go, okay, wow, I have wisdom. I am wise. I have a deep understanding of principle. So I have arrived, so to speak. But that's not the definition. The definition is a deeper understanding of principle. So when you arrive at a deeper understanding of principle, where do you go from there? Well, deeper, I guess. And so to see that the biggest danger to achieving our potential is something we know for sure, that is just an absolute example of putting the brakes on a deeper understanding.
I see another book coming out of that thought.
Hey, I'm just trying to explain it better. I'm just trying to find a way to explain complicated things in simple ways.
Yeah.
And that includes to me.
Yeah, it makes you think and drill down a little deeper into your conscious and subconscious to try to understand better. I have one more question, and that is, what is it, Andy, that you do to squeeze the day?
I get up early. That helps me squeeze the day. I get all the juice out of a day. George Washington Carver did. He said he would go out before the birds ever even woke up and get his marching orders for the day. And I kind of feel like that's what I do.
Thank you for joining us today. Your story is inspiring and reinforces that challenges do become opportunities. We can learn so much from one another, and certainly from the experience of those in their second chapter of life. Squeeze the Day is made possible through listeners like you. If you enjoy this podcast, please help us continue to share inspiring stories of older adults and visit 54ward.org. That's FIFTYFORWARD.org to make a contribution. Now, as I leave you today, I'm sending you all a big squeeze. Until next time.